Contextul în care urmează ca emisiile de carbon să graveze fiecare business din lume și nu numai, pentru că va ajunge să ne afecteze și pe persoană fizică, cercetarea merge mai departe. În Marea Britanie, un startup creează plante cu valoare agricolă, cum este, de exemplu, grâul, care să fie capabile să stocheze mai mult carbon în sol. Modificarea genetică prin care se face lucrul acesta este celebra metodă CRISPR-Cas și se realizează în cadrul aceluiași genom al speciei. Deci ceea ce rezultă nu este un organism modificat genetic. În termenii definiției clasice, organismele modificate genetic sunt obținute prin încrucișarea între specii. Dar, după Brexit, Marea Britanie este din ce în ce mai aproape de implementarea acestor metode genomice. Pe de altă parte, Uniunea Europeană este în procesul de aprobare a acestora și, cel mai probabil, anul următor, tehnologiile genomice vor fi aprobate de către instituțiile decidente la nivel european, împreună cu o reglementare strictă a acestor tehnologii.
Genetic modification of food crops isn't new, but it has typically focused on traits like disease resistance and higher yields. Scientists are now aiming to gene edit plants to directly fight the climate crisis by sucking more carbon from the air.
If you think about agriculture, it's happening on half of the Earth's habitable surface. It's a huge potential sink for carbon, and that's what we're trying to do. So the way we do that is to look at how plants can capture carbon in a way that's not going to compete with yield. So we definitely don't want to give farmers a trade-off between farming carbon and farming food. We want them doing both. Step one was to improve photosynthesis so we get more yield. Step two now, and that's what these plants are doing behind me, is to have an additional carbon fixation pathway to get carbon trapped by the plants and put below ground into the soil for long-term sequestration.
Scientists have identified useful traits in other plants, many of which depend on genes that already exist in the complex genomes of wheat and soya, but are dormant there. Gene editing aims to switch them back on.
What traits do you need to encourage in the plant so that they sequester more carbon?
The roots are fantastic because they are evolved to do exactly this, to be a massive interface with the environment. So if you think about the surface area of the root network, it's actually the biggest managed interface we have with the natural world. So if we can be doing our chemistry on that root surface, to be taking carbon and converting it into other forms, that's where we're doing a reaction on the surface of the roots to draw CO2 out of the air and convert it into an inorganic form that stays below ground.
The team are testing soil around their gene-edited seedlings for carbon concentration. The more is being captured, the more quickly the sample will turn yellow.
We're still figuring out exactly how that's going to scale in the real world. In the pots behind me here, typically there's about a gram of carbon being left in this very small amount of soil. When you start extrapolating that out, you're talking about megaton range CO2 sequestration for single crops like soybean. Today, if you think about emissions, roughly we release a gram of CO2 for every gram of food we make. This looks like you could offset between half to all of the CO2 emissions associated with growing that crop. So we're into the category of thinking about net zero farming here. Our very first trial was very illustrative. This was last year in the UK, about an hour from here, and the beginning of the season was so wet we couldn't even get a tractor on the field. And then within a month of getting the seed in the ground, it was so dry we had to put in irrigation. So you have the too little and too much water problem happening in a very short order of time.
What works in controlled conditions, though, may not outside in a field, where these carbon-removing soya varieties will have their first test planting later this year in Argentina.